Jack Helsel of the Philadelphia Daily News wrote that this film touches the funny bone by focusing on familiar fare, the kind of experiences that most people in the audience may have experienced in their own lives. The New Yorker's Pauline Kael griped that you can still feel the stage origins of this material, and the director leaves pauses for laughs that don't come. And Pittsburgh Post-Gazette critic Wynne Fanning raved that this delightful comedy has all the lightness of a feather and brings to the theater audience the same comfortable feeling that all is well with the world. On this episode of Ruined Childhoods, we decide the fate of Barefoot in the Park.
Sequel. Reboot. Which one will it be? It's the Ruined Childhoods podcast.
Greetings, Starfighters! Welcome to Ruined Childhoods. I have been looking forward to saying that for several weeks now. I'm Dan. I'm one of the hosts of this program. My brother John is the other host. Say hi, John.
Hi. How you doing?
Yeah. So for those of you who have listened to us, you may be aware we're coming back from a bit of a hiatus.
Yeah, I think that it was just kind of a perfect storm of busyness going on both of our ends. And I know that I watched the movie of the episode long before we even recorded the last episode. So I hope that I can brush off the old memories and be able to talk about it coherently. But we'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah. I mean, yes, of course. We'll get to that. We'll our today's feature, Barefoot in the Park. We will certainly get to that. Absolutely. We're of course in the middle of our kind of like unplanned Robert Redford.
Yeah.
Thing.
Yeah.
We don't
a nice
really
spread of red.
Nice. Yeah. So, and today we're going back quite a ways in terms of Mr. Redford's career.
Yeah, but before we do that,
oh yes,
Dan, you see any good movies lately?
John, I'm so glad you asked because normally I my answer for this question is lame, and it's like, oh, I caught 15 minutes of this. Or
yeah.
I watched the movie we're talking about and like LA Confidential for the 20th time. Mm-hmm. It's one of my few Kevin Spacey cheats.
Oh, really?
I have a couple of Kevin Spacey cheats because otherwise I just look at him.
For me, it's Baby Driver.
Yeah. Nah.
Yeah.
It's for me, it's LA Confidential. Usual Suspects, though it's been quite some time since I watched it, and I would probably watch 7.
Yeah, I have watched 7 since the news broke.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but nothing 21st century. It's all
right.
It's all 90s for me. Oh, all right. I would probably I wouldn't object to watching See No Evil, Hear No Evil because he's in it.
Is he in that?
He's the bad guy in it. He does like an awful British accent. It's
Isn't there a movie that I'm pretty sure we've covered on, wait a second. Was he in Quick Change? He was in a movie where he plays a Tootsie.
Oh, you're thinking of Tootsie? Wait,
Tootsie?
Working Girl?
Because we haven't
done
Working Girl. Isn't he in Tootsie briefly or something as like he's like a purse thief on a subway or something like that?
Are you thinking of Sylvester Stallone in Bananas?
No.
I didn't know if you were just like confusing artists that you can no longer separate the art from the artist for because of all of the terrible allegations.
Now I'm going to look it up because
I'm
I feel like
referring to Woody Allen, of course.
Right. I feel like it's his first on-screen role.
Maybe. So anyway, John, while you look that up.
It was Heartburn, which we didn't cover.
Oh, no. Right. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So anyway, Heartburn, not one of the movies I've seen recently, but I have been catching some recent films, most notably Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Oh, what'd you think?
Phenomenal. I thought, I mean, and this is
so good.
This connects. So when I watch this movie, and maybe I am just finding something that's not there, but to me, it was such a metaphor about how busy our lives are. Yeah. And I guess for me, I'm sitting there watching it and I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I need to jump universes every now and again. Like I need to switch from at home Dan to school Dan to director of the school play Dan to father Dan, not as a priest, but as a parent. And I feel like I don't know. I felt that movie very much. And on top of that, I just thought it was I thought it was a really cool way, if they were actually going for something like that, to use this whole multiverse thing that we've got going on in so many different.
Well, yeah, I mean, you are certainly not alone as being somebody who is impacted in big emotional ways by this movie. I mean, I feel like it's definitely a contender for Best Picture because it really has created a giant ripple. And, it is funny because it did come out at the same time as the latest Doctor Strange movie,
right?
Which is the Multiverse of Madness. And it's such a better multiple universe movie.
Well,
even though multiple universes had been set up for several movies in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, this one does it in a way where it's just hey, this is how it's happening. This is what's going on. And that's the information that you need to know.
And I thought that as I feel like the multiverse thing is kind of it's a fun gimmick for comic book fans. And I think in terms of Marvel, it was done to perfection in Spider-Man No Way Home. With the the teaming, I guess it's been a year. We could say it, teaming up the three,
all the Spider-Men.
I thought that was I thought that in terms of using it as a gimmick, I thought that was the best use of its gimmickry.
Right.
But I felt that in terms of using it to actually mean something and connect to adults. I mean, Everything Everywhere is rated R. Not that means kids won't see it, but
I hope they do.
It was one of those that I felt, and on top of the fact that I was oh my God, I'm connecting to this on a personal level. The performances are fantastic.
So good.
Michelle Yeoh, who I've loved since Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. And
she's amazing.
That was the first time I saw her. Ki Huy Kwan, of course.
Back, baby.
Oh man, hold on to your potatoes. It's great. He's great. Stephanie Hsu, who's in it, is wonderful. James Hong pops up, and Jamie Lee freaking Curtis.
Yeah.
I cannot say enough good things about this movie.
Yeah, no, you are not alone. It's one of those movies where it's just how did they do this? And we just get to sit back and enjoy it and just be glad that it exists.
It's so well done. If that doesn't win best editing at the very least, damn.
I'm sure it will take away some trophies.
Another movie that I watched that not as award worthy, but I definitely found it interesting was Don't Worry, Darling.
Oh yeah, I watched that also.
It was probably the biggest budget episode of Black Mirror I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's definitely very Black Mirror-y. It's, Shyamalan-y.
It's definitely Shyamalan-y. Yeah. It's definitely trying to make a statement.
Right.
And there were things about it I appreciated, and then there were things about it that I didn't. There wasn't anything that I really disliked about it, but I thought it was
appreciate that Olivia Wilde is taking big swings directorially and not just sticking to what she knows works for her like something like Booksmart. You know,
Right,
this
which was
is
a great directorial debut.
which is so amazing. And but going to something like this is definitely a bold move because it really is, you know, nothing like the last one. And I don't know, it's really hard to separate this one from the hype around it and from, you know, all of the things going on behind the scenes.
Which I gotta admit, I haven't really, like, I've followed it enough where, like, I know the basics, but I've got, like, just because I didn't care. I didn't think I was going to watch it. And then it was streaming on HBO Max. And
Right. Yeah.
I was like, this is kind of the right thing that I'm going to put on right now. And I'm like, if I turn it off in 5 minutes, I'm not going to be heartbroken. But, and I was like, there was enough to keep me interesting. Florence Pugh, I think, always gives an interesting performance.
Absolutely. If it was anybody other than her, I don't know if I would have liked it as much.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because I think about, I'm like, who else could I see pulling that off? And I'm like, Naomi Watts circa 2000.
Yeah, certainly. You know, that's Mulholland Drive era.
Right.
Yeah.
21 grams. Yeah.
21. Yeah. So I think that, you know, these days, I think that there's a lot of people who could pull it off, but maybe not as well as Florence Pugh could. And, you know, Florence Pugh is so good at making you feel like something is terribly wrong while everything looks completely right. And she's just the best at that. She's the go-to.
But I appreciate without giving, you know, it's a current movie, so don't want to give too much away, but there were certain idiosyncrasies about it that tipped me off and basically said, like, okay, either there's something more to this movie than meets the eye, or there were bad choices being made.
Yeah.
So I will leave it at that for now, but I will say I enjoyed it. I appreciated it a lot more than I thought it would, and it was a lot more than I thought it would be, though I don't know that it needed to be.
Okay.
And I also say this as like, you know, in my teaching job, you know, teaching books that were written in and set in the 1950s. I do a lot of, you know, pre-teaching about gender roles and what was expected of women and what was expected of men and so on and so forth. So the basic premise of Don't Worry, Darling, this kind of 1950s suburban utopia, there was something appealing to me about it, and like the idea that, like, okay, there's something underneath the surface. So that was appealing to me, but I honestly didn't think I was going to be as interested in it as I was.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm glad that it was something that kind of went to streaming pretty quickly, because it's one of those things where it's just like, I'm not going to pay for this, but I'm curious. I like movies that take place in that era. I like something where there's a mystique behind it. Yeah. And Florence Pugh is great.
Yes.
And so there is also like part of me that's like, if somebody like Florence Pugh signs on to do this movie, then I'm sure that the script is somewhat decent. Otherwise, you don't get a Pugh level actor involved.
Not at all. And it's true, because, like, you know, she is on a hot streak, and
yeah,
it would be like, you know, she can't afford to do. I think it's kind of, I'm sure she could afford it, but like to do a movie that kind of goes unnoticed or undernoticed, like it almost matters more that like her name is out there and at least like she's getting some good notices for it,
right?
Versus the film being a smashing success. So
right. Yeah.
I think she just had to know she was going to look good coming out of it. Which,
yeah, of course.
Yeah, she does.
Yeah.
But she's great. And I think Olivia Wilde, I give a lot of, you know, credit and respect to Olivia Wilde as a filmmaker.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I'd call, you know, Don't Worry, Darling, definitely like hit or miss. Not the overall, you know, greatness of Booksmart. but a solid second feature.
I think that it would have been better if it were somebody other than Harry Styles, because I feel like that, to me, seemed more like stunt casting than an actual, like, thoughtful choice.
It didn't need to be Harry Styles.
It didn't need to be Harry Styles. I feel like that took away a little bit from it, because if you look at the rest of the cast, you know, you have Chris Pine and Nick Kroll and, you know, there's just incredible actors in it. And to have somebody who's so mega famous for being not an actor, it's just like, huh.
There was something that I thought worked with his casting, and it's not to say that somebody else couldn't have been cast, but, and it's, I don't want to reveal too much about the film. It's something we can talk about independently. There was an aspect of his casting that I thought was done well.
Okay.
Not to say it had to be him, but something that casting someone like him worked for.
All right. Well,
so I will leave it at that. I have not yet. So it broke my heart, but I had to start watching, of course, Weird, the Al Yankovic story.
whoa.
I could not watch it. I was like, I am going to sit and I'm going to watch it in as thick a sitting as possible. So I've done it in thirds. I'm up to the final third, I think, or I might be closer to the end than that. I haven't really been keeping track. I've just been enjoying it.
I've watched it twice so far, and it's so good. It is the only way. Dan, I thought that you picked up a candle just then.
Yes.
What are you drinking?
Well, I've decided it's a new diet I'm on. It's a wax diet. It's a hot wax diet. It helps digestion. But yes, no, I'm drinking melted wax out of a candle. Or could it be some seasonal eggnog?
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
Interesting. So, I could have sworn that you were picking up a candle. Anyway.
I'm sure I could find a scented candle that both looks and at least smells like this eggnog.
So anyway, I felt like it was the best way to do a Weird Al biopic.
Yes.
By making it a parody of biopics and by just taking it way over the top, putting in like a little tiny dose of the truth, and then the rest of it just being absolute banana pants.
And obviously, absolute banana pants. And I mean, again, it's so hard to watch a parody of music biopics without the kind of specter of Walk Hard, but...
No, it stands on its own in a really amazing way.
Oh, yes. No. That's what I was kind of saying is there was one part of it that I felt was too close to the Walk Hard style.
Okay.
Yeah. But other than that, I thought, from what I've seen so far, at least, like, just brilliant. I love the different twists and turns of it. Again, that I don't want to talk about specifically, but like love the structure of it. And it was kind of the only way to do it. Like, how do you make a biographical movie about Weird Al that is in the spirit of Weird Al?
They did it.
How you do it.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm looking forward to watching, and like Daniel Radcliffe, Evan Rachel Wood, so great, both of them, and everybody else who's in it as well.
There's okay, because these things take place in the beginning of the movie, all I will say is that what makes me really happy is that when you look at the performances from even the smaller characters, you know that everybody knows what they're doing.
Yes.
And I will start off by talking about people in his early life, like the people that he goes to high school with, who convince him to come out to a party. And when it's revealed that it's a polka party, and the commitment that everybody in that room has to it being not goofy, but like they're sincere about loving it, it works. And I just commend every actor who was in that room, because it was done perfectly. I loved it.
Brilliant. brilliant.
And Toby Huss as his father is so good.
So funny.
Yeah.
So funny. Yeah, a great movie. I mean, like, you just have to be a fan of comedy to enjoy it, and if you're a fan of Weird Al, like we are, it's
what's
just got
great is
so many
that you
treats
can,
for you.
I think that you can watch it without necessarily being a big Weird Al fan and still
Right.
appreciate it. But there are a lot of things in there where if you're like a real fan, you'll notice stuff. Like there's like an ad on a corkboard for like Cooney's Karate School.
Yep.
There's, even just like the Scotty Brothers, the record label guys. Like,
Yes.
just knowing that he was on Scotty Brothers Records, was an important aspect.
I mean, he was like the only artist on Scotty Brothers Records. I don't
Pretty much.
remember
Yeah.
anything else, but Weird Al. So such a funny movie, and I look forward to watching it. I look forward to finishing it, and look forward to watching it again in the future. This will not be a one and only viewing. So,
Right.
Yeah. Same can be said for Everything Everywhere All at Once. Not so much for Don't Worry, Darling.
Yeah.
Don't know that I'm going to watch it again.
So, before we get to the movie of the week, I just wanted to shout out. I started watching the show Reboot that's on Hulu, and Dan, it's so good.
It's good.
It's
Worth
so
checking
good.
out.
You got to watch it. It's a lot of fun. It's about rebooting an old, like, early 2000s sitcom with all of the same actors in it, but
Right.
making it more of a serious tone and actually giving character development and all those kind of things. So it's really wonderful.
You know what? I started watching it, and then unfortunately, like, I started watching it late at night, so I fell asleep more because I was tired.
I watched it. I started it last night, and then I think I was like falling asleep during the last 2 episodes I watched. So today I went back and I watched those again, and I was like, "Yep, still good," and continued on. The other thing that I wanted to mention was just one quick thing, and then we're gonna move along to Barefoot in the Park.
Before we do, I want to throw in another quick series plug.
Okay.
Because in the same vein of reboots, I watched the first episode of Wednesday on Netflix.
Okay.
And
People seem to like it.
Yes. Yeah. I enjoyed it. Like I said, it was late. I fell asleep, but I enjoy it. It's interesting to see Tim Burton doing a series. I think it's actually good for him. I think it's a step in the right direction for him, because I really feel like he has lost his direction as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
Really, like, since the early 2000s.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like after Big Fish.
I would say Big Fish might be the last one where it's like, oh, an interesting Tim Burton movie.
Yeah, after Big Fish, it was all like Johnny Depp and crazy hats.
Yep, pretty much.
All right.
Yep. But one thing I did want to mention is that in the last episode, you may have heard me talking about a certain game show pilot that I was on called Beat the Monkey. And since then, I have found one of the creators of the show because on his website, he has the following information about Beat the Monkey. And this is more than I've ever seen about Beat the Monkey on the internet to date. Can 3 college students beat a monkey in a game of knowledge and skill? Beat the Monkey, an offbeat game show pilot hosted by J. Keith Van Straten, was a finalist for a season order at G4. We lost out to the game show Hurl, which featured contestants vomiting on amusement park rides. So that gives me way more information than I had before about like the fate of that show, that it was just passed over for something that was about people barfing on roller coasters. And so that's pretty hilarious, and that's an interesting thing. And then I got in touch with the guy, the creator, and he sent me a link to watch a sizzle reel for the show. And it's not something I can share out, unfortunately, but wow, yes, I did share it with Dan. Yes.
More like a sizzle surreal.
Oh, very good. Very good. And so there were certain things about it that were different from the way that I remembered them. I remembered the other guy's name also being John, but I guess it was like Matt. And that was very puzzling for me because I was like, why would I remember that so wrong? That felt like such an odd detail to then be wrong. And the woman's name was Camilla, who was the female contestant who was with us. But everything else was pretty much the same. You know, it was it was wild to see, you know, this many years later. Pretty wild.
Kind of nice confirmation that it actually happened.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So one thing that I wanted to do is note that earlier in this episode, I mentioned the movie Heartburn, which I would love to cover on this show sometime. But Heartburn was directed by Mike Nichols, who directed the stage, the play Barefoot in the Park in the earlier 60s. And what a lovely way to bring us into the film, the 1967 film, you know, coming off of a very successful Broadway run, a Neil Simon play directed by Mike Nichols to wide acclaim. Robert Redford was in it when it was in its theatrical run. And and here we are to talk about its adaptation to film. Dan, was this your first time watching Barefoot in the Park?
It sure was, John. It sure was my first time, though it felt very familiar, probably because I've seen Dharma and Greg.
Okay, yeah.
Barefoot in the Park,
okay,
yes.
Do you want to hear my synopsis is 2 sentences long.
Do the synopsis. There we go.
Geeky Paul and free spirit Corey are madly in love and can't get enough of each other during their 6-night honeymoon. But once real life begins for these newlyweds and their differences begin to show, hard decisions have to be made. That's all I got.
That's really what it's a pretty light
yeah
comedy.
Yes, and the movie definitely acts like it's a play. You know, you have very few set pieces. A lot of things happen, you know, are very dialogue based. There's not a lot that happens that doesn't have to do with dialogue. You get your kooky characters. You know, it's definitely got the life of like a Broadway comedy.
A Neil Simon. It's the same rhythms. The same type of, like, you know, character juxtapositions, and like I feel like, you know, it's when you've read a lot of Neil Simon, watched a lot of Neil Simon, and I do really enjoy a lot of Neil Simon's work. Yeah, but there's definitely a rhythm and a very specific sense of humor to it. Yeah, and. You know, okay, so Robert Redford plays Paul, Jane Fonda plays Corey, and this is, you know, one of the, I think, 5 films they did together, and they have such great chemistry. Like, it's no surprise that they continue to do work together. They're so delightful together, and, you know, it's funny because these are 2 people who are still around and still acting and still really attractive. Like, yeah. You think that in 1967 you'd have these 2 hot actors and be like, wow, they're very attractive. Well, see what I'm sure in time they won't be that attractive. No, they're still very attractive. Yeah. Nope. Jane Fonda and Robert Redford have taken good care of themselves, and yeah, still with us, still working. Though I think Robert Redford said Old Man and the Gun was going to be his last.
Oh, really?
His last one. So, but I mean, that also was 2 years ago,
right? So yeah, I consider him still active. pretty active, because we'll see. And Jane Fonda clearly is still Grace and Frankieing it up. Yeah.
And are they doing like a book club sequel or something?
Oh yeah, probably.
But the cast also includes Charles Boyer, who we last encountered in Gaslight.
We sure did. And It was really wonderful to see him in a role that was kooky and fun.
Yes.
Because man, oh man, did I hate Charles Boyer, the piece
He's
of
terrible
garbage.
in Gaslight.
Oh my God,
he's great acting, but terrible
it's the
person.
character that coined the term, that
The
like
original Gaslighter.
the original Gaslighter. Yeah.
The OG.
No kidding. You can't take that away from Charles Boyer.
No.
And yeah,
He's definitely an OG in this.
Yeah, you got Mildred Natwick, who plays Ethel, who's so good.
Academy Award nominated for her performance.
Yeah, I know. Absolutely amazing. And I mean, I have to give a major shout out to
Yes.
to Stanley Zbornak himself.
Yes.
who absolute Herb Edelman, who's the telephone repairman, and man, oh man, is it nice to see him.
He was a Neil Simon regular. He was also in The Odd Couple.
Oh, okay.
I mean, and possibly other things. I think to be a regular, you need to have done like more than two. Herbert Edelman definitely has a very Neil Simon, like
cadence.
Yes, he's perfect for the the Neil Simon sarcasm. Where it's like after he walks up this fifth floor walk up, and this isn't an exact line from it, but it's a Neil Simon scenario where he's dripping sweat, and Jane Fonda would offer him a glass of water, and after like 10 minutes, and then be like, "That's all right, just give me a glass and I'll catch the sweat dripping from my forehead." And
oh my God,
that's a Neil Simon. That's what you'd find. And that's basically his role.
It's funny because now when I think Neil Simon, I picture Nate Cordry, because he played him in Fosse Verdon.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So like I picture Nate Cordry as Neil Simon. So yeah, if you listened to us a year or so ago, we talked a lot about Fosse Verdon, that's for sure.
Yes. Yeah. Wonderful series. Recommend.
So yeah, this movie, it was my first time seeing it as well. It's a lot of fun. I enjoyed the pace of it. I enjoyed seeing the way that it was presented. 1967, that's definitely a year where, or at least an era where, yes, you still have some of these movies that feel like this, I don't know, I'm like xylophone playing in the background and antics and farcical stuff, but you also certainly have a lot of more serious, intense movies going on. It's certainly a fraught time in the country, and that's being reflected in the art. But you also have movies like this where it's just about a simple relationship where it's like, can these two wildly different people, make it in their marriage? And what does that look like? And, it's a simple story, but it's really just, it hinges on the performances because it's just it's such a verbal piece.
Yeah, it really does. The premise itself is, at least from a contemporary perspective, it's a bit shaky because I feel like, modern day, you're looking at these two people and you're like, they seem to know very little about each other to be getting married.
Right.
Again, that's from a modern day perspective where it's socially not just acceptable, but expected to, that you live with a partner before moving in together.
This was a time when, a lot of people were getting married after knowing each other for not that long. And that certainly still happens these days, but then it was more of the norm. And so I don't think that you could really do something that takes place present day like this without addressing how quick it was and, them not living together before, or at least cohabitating a little bit in some way. And so, it's kind of a funky one there.
Right. Yeah, and I guess, I don't know, before we get to the before we get to the section of the episode where we talk about what we would potentially do to bring it back.
Right.
I don't know that there's much more to say about the film itself. It's a pretty it was a huge hit. Played at Radio City Music Hall for like an unprecedented 12 weeks straight.
Oh, wow.
Back in 67. And by the way, when we're talking about the films of 1967, just to kind of illustrate, John, your point about the very different types of films coming out at that time, I'm looking at just like a list of it's Mubi's top 50 films of 1967. And it's The Graduate, Bonnie and Clyde, Cool Hand Luke are up there. Point Blank with Lee Marvin, The Producers, The Dirty Dozen. So, we're definitely at this moment in American cinema where, filmmakers are taking big swings, to go back to Olivia Wilde.
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny because you mentioned The Graduate, directed by Mike Nichols, who we've mentioned already before, who was the one that brought this to Broadway. So, somebody like Mike Nichols is kind of going from doing this on Broadway to, making these movies that have depth to them, that have meaning. And it isn't just set pieces for silly jokes. And, it's a much more adult theme as well in The Graduate. And, here, I don't know, you've got a pretty normal couple. Well, an abnormal, normal couple. And then you have like the zany neighbor, and then the mother who just is really there to create stakes and I don't know.
Stakes and tension.
Tension, yes, but it's not really tension that we typically are seeing, because Paul gets along with her really well, and the tension is really in the point where she's like maybe missing, where she didn't get home.
Well,
that's not really high stakes tension.
Right. No, but it's the tension of, the mother is widowed, and Corey really wants her to start dating again, and wants her to get involved with somebody who turns out that, with the neighbor,
Victor Velasco.
Yes. It's so that's the amount of tension they have in this movie, or like just the tension between Paul being, very uptight, but also, ambitious, hardworking lawyer, and Corey being, I don't know, for lack of a nicer word, a kind of, flibberty gibbet.
Oh, Dan, you're terrible.
I said I wouldn't use the F word, but here I go again.
She's playing into the housewife role, but in a way that makes sense for who she is as a person. She cares a lot about home decor and tries to get things dialed in and work with what she's got. And she doesn't let the inconveniences weigh her down, such as having to climb all the steps and all that kind of stuff. She's really looking at the bright side of things. Mm-hmm. The bedroom is too small for a bed even, but it's okay. They're going to make it work. They're going to figure it out. There's a hole in the skylight. Oh, to have a skylight. And, it's not something that she really even stresses over, or like the heater won't turn on, or the heater won't work. And she's, just doing her best to make it seem fine.
All positivity.
For Paul. Yeah.
Yes. Which is great. It's great. It's this great, contradictions, which, that's what works. I think, for a lot of Neil Simon, just taking like really contrasting personalities and putting them together.
Yeah.
But a comedy in general. I mean, it's also like, look at The Odd Couple.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, it's like the same. It's not the
Sure.
same thing,
Yeah.
but it's similar.
You
How
know,
are
Dan,
these two people going to coexist?
Dan, it's funny that you mentioned The Odd Couple, because there was something that this movie reminded me of that ties in nicely with The Odd Couple. The apartment building itself, did it feel familiar to you? And I'm talking about like the hallways and stuff.
Well, okay, what felt familiar about it was it reminded me of an apartment that I lived in on the Upper West Side.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay, you were just dancing around what I was talking about. It reminded me of the building from The Apartment.
Oh, from The Apartment.
It like the
Okay.
layout of like the apartment doors and the stairs, and
Right.
all I was thinking is just like, oh, inside there he's making spaghetti with a tennis racket. Like,
Right.
like that's just happening on another floor of the same building.
A very, yeah. I didn't, I guess what's funny is that had not occurred to me. I think mostly because of they mention where the apartment building is, and
I know it's different locations.
Well, I remember his
yeah.
was like off Central Park Westers, and like it was like ridiculously like, how does he afford this place? And then it's 1960.
Yeah, and this one's by Washington Square Park.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which definitely makes a lot more sense, and it's a fun setting, and Redford and like all the performances are great. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's really cute.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So it's the one for me where it's like, now knowing what this movie is, I will happily put this on if I just want to put something nice on in the background or whatever, if I'm doing something else. Like, it's nice to know what it is and that it's around. And like Robert Redford and Jane Fonda, I could watch them do almost anything. So why not watch them do this?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, is there any reason to do anything more with it? Like you said before, Jane Fonda and Robert Redford still around? Are you thinking?
Yeah,
sequel?
I mean, well, certainly it would be fun to have a, how many years is it later? 50 years later, like Barefoot in the Park.
I mean, 55.
Jesus, 60 years later? Oh my God.
55
I'm
years.
like,
yeah.
wow. I don't know if I'd want to see something where it's necessarily the two of them, unless it was some sort of like looking back on their work together combined as a duo, and really, shining a light on Barefoot in the Park. Or if it's a matter of doing something now set in the mid 60s that takes the Barefoot in the Park script and the whole plot and builds it up a little bit more, gives it a little bit more weight, maybe adds a couple things here and there, show him in the courtroom, do something more with it. So I think that there's a possibility to remake this, keeping it still set in the mid 60s and finding ways to, I don't know, enhance it using what you've got. Because I think that, the questions about, from Jane Fonda about like, is this marriage right? Should they be together even? Like, days after they get married, essentially. I think that there's way more to look into it rather than her making, in the moment decisions to say something. So, we don't see any friends. It's just her mom. Like, it would be great to be able to see other characters. And I feel like, when we have movies now, like, and we've had that for a long time, but like When Harry Met Sally, where it goes into relationships in a much greater way, maybe there is a pathway where the script can be just kind of beefed up a little bit to give a little bit, I don't know, make it feel a little bit more interesting.
Like, like Tony Kushner, take a swing at it, add some depth.
Sure.
He was like, he's the most, I in trying to think of a named screenwriter and playwright who could like take this and actually do something. That was just the first name that popped into my head was Tony Kushner. And I at first I thought, I was like, oh man, we should just have Jane Fonda and Robert Redford do a straight up remake of this.
Okay.
Shot for shot remake. Have Redford and Fonda do the remake in the same roles, make no comment at all about the fact that they're both very old.
Yeah.
And I don't know, have the mother played by like Anne Hathaway or something. And just like totally flip-flopping around.
That'd be super funny.
Yeah, so
Victor Velasco could be played by like Jacob Tremblay.
I was gonna say Harry Styles, but then
I say go even younger. Go younger.
Go. Yeah. All right, Jacob Tremblay. It is definitely. Gaten Matarazzo as
no.
Victor Velasco. No, yeah, get those Stranger Kids things and something there. Yeah. There's that. There's the idea, like you mentioned, the whole kind of almost like existential questioning of this marriage, like right afterwards, and it reminded me of and I'm gonna get a little personal here and reveal something. Like I think it was the day after my son Simon was born last April, and so for those of you not in the know, have a daughter who's 8.5, Chloe, and a son who's just about 8 months, Simon. And it was like the day after he was born, and I just had this like I had that moment, and I had that moment of like, oh God, what did we do? It was like things were like we were fine, and like and it was like, oh no, like we made this, like this is not a, I mean, yeah, and that's definitely not a like, you know, we're not, no taking that back.
Right. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And not that I wanted it. This was like maybe an hour long like thing where I was just like, oh my God. But just the idea of that, and maybe going in a more just not just taking the Neil Simon script and adding some stuff that I imagine in your vision where, you know, another screenwriter supplements, is it keeping the same like cadences? Is it keeping the same,
I think so,
humor? Yeah. So, I mean, I'm thinking like, what if it didn't?
Okay. And
what if you, and now especially after, I'm trying to remember what else we had talked about earlier. Oh, it was with the show Reboot that you were talking about, where they take like a more serious approach to it. That's kind of what I'm wondering. Like, what if you do that with Barefoot in the Park? And I don't necessarily think there's a need for that, because I think there are plenty of other movies and shows out there that do that. But I don't know. What if I wonder if that's how it works now. Like,
yeah,
does this, I just don't, I watched it and I was like, this is adorable and it's cute, but I don't think this works now. There was a Broadway revival in 2006. But 2000, even the difference between the way that we look at things from 2006 to now is very different. And I feel like you can't watch something like this without thinking about, like, you know, her trying to be like the perfect housewife.
Yeah.
And how he's the breadwinner, and the mother-in-law's got to find a man, and
I know, yeah.
There's all that, yeah. And there's all that that's part of it, which I think like your idea of adding some depth to it could potentially justify those.
Sure, because I think that there's also a really great case for adding in scenes where maybe each of them is talking to a different friend. Maybe for Paul, it's one of his, colleagues at the law firm or something. And then maybe for Jane, it's, a friend that she knows who's maybe been married a little bit longer, and maybe who isn't married, and maybe it's
thinking of Catherine O'Hara in The Paper.
Oh my God, it's totally Catherine O'Hara in The Paper. So I'm thinking about like conversations that they could have where it's just like, you don't have to do it like this, right? It's the 60s. Things are changing. Like, we're really in this time where women's liberation is starting to really bubble up. And that could be something that like really shakes her and maybe gives Corey a more of a reason to want to dissolve the marriage, where it's like, you know what, maybe you are too different, and maybe that's not where I should be right now, because I'm still figuring out who I am, and really asking those questions. And then I think that what's really sweet about the movie is that she lists as a reason why they're not right for each other one reason is because he won't go barefoot in the park with her, and at the end he does. And it's this symbolic gesture of like his way of changing and really becoming, showing that he is the right partner for her. Mm-hmm. And I think that it would make that moment even stronger if there's greater reasons for it to be happening, rather than just like, hey, dude, you got to cut loose a little bit. Like, there's greater things going on.
I mean, maybe she needs like another, not another love interest, but I don't actually know, that's not the right answer. But as you're talking about it, and I'm thinking about, okay, it's the 60s and the times are changing, and like they live in Greenwich Village. So part of me wonders, like, okay, well, like, I don't think Neil Simon meant it this way, but like, are Paul and Corey metaphors for like the two kind of sides at war culturally in the 1960s, which I don't think so. The play was written, I mean, the play premiered on Broadway in 63, and yeah. So I feel like if that was done intentionally, or if that could, I don't think it was, but
well, Dan, here's also something that's interesting is like, I don't know the specifics. I'm sure that there were some protests in 1967 right outside their window.
Right.
I'm sure that there, even if you played everything else exactly the same, but included some shots of what was going on outside of the apartment, then it could change the way that the entire movie is framed.
In Washington Square Park.
In Washington Square Park in 1967, there were certainly protests going on, like without a doubt. And so, I mean, war in Vietnam, there's so many things that could possibly be, protested then. Are you finding anything about specifically Washington Square Park in 1967?
I mean, I don't know if this is Washington, but there was a New York City riot, and there were lots of riots apparently in the summer of 1967.
Well, this is the winter of 1967, or 1966, 1967.
Okay. So maybe not those riots. And I don't think any of these happened in the Village, but I mean, it's a couple of years before Stonewall.
Right, yeah.
So there's definitely, look, there's unrest, certainly. So.
Well, another thing is like, what if Ethel, the mother, ends up, Corey's trying to set her up with Victor Velasco, but, Ethel comes onto him and finds out that he's gay. And, there's a joke. It's a joke. It's a comment that's played for comedy about how there's a same-sex couple living in the building.
Right.
And it's played to be as kind of like a check out the wackos in 1C kind of a thing. And certainly in any modern telling of the story, that line has certainly changed. But, that could be another thing where it's just like, maybe Ethel and Victor's relationship and the way that they, if he is gay, how that conversation could lead to like, it's like, well, why are you in such a desperate need to find a person right now anyway? Like,
Yeah.
who, like, what are you about? Like, what is Ethel about?
Yeah. I mean, getting into the whole, like, how long has she been married?
Right.
Which is, and it connects actually to the play that I recently directed, because it's originally called The Curious Savage. And it's about a character named Ethel P. Savage, who her husband dies after they've been married. She said she married him when she was 16. And so she's like married to him for, I don't know, a good like 40 to 50 years. And then after he dies, she kind of just like, she takes a lot of the money that, because he was very wealthy, their family was very wealthy, and she uses it to make people happy. And it's this whole kindness fund. And she's very much about being independent and doing what the whole premise is, that her 3 kids, who are actually her stepchildren,
Right.
like have her committed so that they can get control of the estate before they learn that she's already sold everything off.
Gotcha.
Anyway, it makes me think of that, because it makes me think of like she has a moment where she's like, look, while I was married, I did everything for my husband, and I took care of him, and I enjoyed it, and that was what I wanted to do. But now I want to do other things.
Yeah.
And see the world. So having Victor be the one to say like, you were with someone for all this time, what's the pressure? What's the rush?
Right. Yeah.
Enjoy being like, he's like, I enjoy being me.
Yeah.
I could see him giving the kind of speech where it's like, if I wind up with someone for a night, great. If I wind up with them for 2 nights, great. If I never see them again, great.
Yeah, he's a gadabout. He's just somebody who just lives their life and has like samples of all of the things that life has to offer.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that would be a good idea. I like that, doing more with it. I definitely don't think this is something that you could just kind of remake or bring into the like modern day.
Unless, hear me out, Dan.
Oh, I'm wondering what you're going to say, because I was thinking something earlier, but
unless this has a M. Night Shyamalan, Olivia Wilde, Black Mirror twist to it, where Paul and Corey are living their lives. It's 1967, New York. They're having this, this whole thing going on. You see it all just in the apartment, which I believe in the play, it really just all takes place in the apartment. But at the end, you look out. It's 2022, baby. The whole world has changed around them, and they've been living in this endless cycle of, figuring out what they're supposed to do with their marriage in 1967.
Like just that building, time does not pass,
or just that apartment unit, or
something to do with the hole in the skylight.
It's the hole in the skylight, exactly. Yeah.
No, I thought you were going to go with the what if it was remade and set in a culture with arranged marriages?
Well, but in cultures with arranged marriages, divorce is very different. I don't know the specifics, but
so is marriage.
Well, yeah, but
no, I was just like, like how could that work in 2022? And that would make the most sense to me. It would be probably, interesting. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all I got for Barefoot in the Park. Pleasant, not my favorite, not my favorite of the Redfords that we've enjoyed thus far.
Well, Dan, I think that we're going to enjoy the next one. Do you want to tell everyone what we're going to be doing?
God, I know for a fact we're going to enjoy the next one because it is among my favorites. It is, and it's the 30th anniversary that we just passed this past September of 1992's Sneakers, directed by Phil Alden Robinson, starring, of course, Mr. Robert Redford, Sidney Poitier, Mary McDonnell, River Phoenix, Dan Aykroyd, David Strathairn, Ben Kingsley, Timothy Busfield. Who am I missing?
Timothy Busfield, my favorite George Glass name.
Yeah. The actual real Timothy Busfield of 30-something.
Yeah, Timothy Busfield's come up on this podcast so many times recently in the past 3 episodes.
And I don't know that we've ever before covered anything that he's been in. This might be the first one.
No, because
Revenge of the Nerds.
Revenge of the Nerds, yeah. So Timothy Busfield, when we were doing The Natural, I watched Field of Dreams, which he is in. There was something else that he popped up in that wasn't something that we were covering directly, but was on the outskirts of it. I don't remember what it was, but Timothy Busfield.
Yeah, Timothy Busfield. So anyway, Sneakers, such a fun movie. I'm so excited to. I always love a good excuse to watch Sneakers. So looking forward to watching.
It's great. I don't think it's on any of the streaming services right now, but hopefully it'll be accessible from a library or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. It should be.
Yeah. Well, if anybody has any thoughts on Barefoot in the Park or any other movie that we've talked about in the past, or perhaps Sneakers, feel free to reach out, ruinchildhoodspodcast@gmail.com. And, or is it ruinchildhoodspod@gmail.com?
Ruinchildhoodspod@gmail.com.
I think we have both, but we only check one. ruinchildhoodspod@gmail.com. We also have a link tree with all of our other stuff in there. The holidays are coming around. We got our merch on our TeePublic site. Dan, I'm so excited that we're back in the recording studio, or the recording studios, as it may be. And as
we're bad. He's in a shack. I'm mad. Sorry, paraphrasing Lethal Weapon 2 without being offensive.
Well, as you run barefoot in the park, I wish you a good journey.
Good journey.